A trip to the Final Four on the line. UConn with the lead. Paige Bueckers with the shot to give UConn an 11-point lead. And they are rolling into the Final Four with the win over USC. 80-73 is your final. That not only makes the women's, but they will also be joining the men's side heading into the Final Four for the first time. Both teams going since 2014. Paige Bueckers with the 28-point night on this one. Here's a look at the men's and women's Final Four appearances. 2024, this is what we're waiting for. But if you look back in 2014, both teams making the Final Four, both teams getting a title. It also happened again in 2004. Will it happen again in 2024? Well, that's certainly what the Huskies are hoping for. And we are here with CBS Sports women's hoops analyst Tarica Foster Bradby on the heels of the final Elite Eight matchup. We have the scene set, but UConn moving on to their 23rd Final Four appearance in program history. Now, this was a matchup that remained extremely close, I'd say, until the final few minutes of this game. It was tied 5 times, including late in the fourth. But just how did the Huskies pull this one out over the Trojans in those final minutes?
I've got 2 words for you. Paige Bueckers. She is unreal. 28 points, 10 boards from her. Her energy, her intensity, unmatched. Completely unmatched in this matchup. And really, I believe her defense is what really separates her from the pack, because we know she's such a prolific scorer, but she was all over her assignment tonight. I mean, the experience of this UConn team really showed up, something that I figured would help them, but I was so concerned about their depth because they were suiting up with 7 players today, and yet they stayed aggressive defensively. They managed to remain disciplined, had 2 players late in that game that was in foul trouble, Aaliyah Edwards and Nico Mule, both core players that were necessary and needed, and yet they remained steadfast under the leadership of Paige Bueckers. It was unreal to see, but my God, I felt so bad for USC in the last moments. They showed Juju Watkins walking away crying, and now I'm I'm emotional for you, Juju.
She's had a great season in USC, and I want to get to them in just a second, but you literally brought me to where I wanted to talk about. 7 players that had suited up. We had a couple of their key players in foul trouble. You talk about the experience of this team, but stepping back and looking at this UConn team as a whole, they lost 5 potential contributors to season-ending injuries. Depth has been a major, major issue with this one, with a limited number of Huskies being able to check in these last few games. But I'd say one of those main reasons they made it this far is the performances of Paige Bueckers, and you talked about that. But just how key has she been to, I'm not just talking about this game, but what they've been able to accomplish to this point and how far they can potentially go?
Yeah, no, you are 100% right. I mean, early on in this season, they took 3 early season losses. There were moments where the team felt disjointed right after AZ Fudd was also injured for the season. It just kind of felt like even though they were winning some basketball games, it just never really felt like this was a UConn team that was really being a UConn team. And then something happened. In-season play, in-conference play started to happen. And then Paige Bueckers announced that she was going to be returning back to UConn for another year. And it just felt as if this team was revived here late in the stretch, going into the Big East tournament, leading into the NCAA tournament. Late in this season, you started to see a resurgence. And I had often said that I felt like this UConn team was playing under the radar because they are UConn, but considering that they had so many things stacked against them early into the season, specifically as it relates to injuries, it just felt as if this would be another season where we don't know if they would be this deep into this tournament. Before last year losing to Ohio State in the Sweet 16, this UConn team had 14 straight appearances in the Final Four. We had gotten so accustomed to them being in the Final Four that it was almost a foregone conclusion that they would be there. And just because over the last few years they had been riddled by injuries, we kind of lost sight of how good this UConn team really is, how experienced this UConn team really is. I think Paige Bueckers is absolutely the one that led the way, that really revived this team. And now they're heading back to the place that they kind of felt like they should have never stopped going.
It's impressive stuff considering you talking about those injuries and what they've dealt with, but then you use that word revived. It's always good to maybe have one of your leaders back. It gives you that extra boost going on throughout that season. But speaking of, I mean, we have to give credit where credit is due, and that's USC and their freshman sensation, Juju Watkins. You talked about seeing her walking off the court with tears in her eyes, and I just want to talk about what do you make of the season that USC has had and maybe the outlook of their 18-year-old, it's crazy when I say that, but their 18-year-old phenom at the helm.
Yeah, when I was 18 years old, I was barely out of my mom's house, and she's out here leading a team back to the Elite Eight, a place where they haven't been in many years. I honestly just think inexperience is what kind of got in their way as this particular matchup continued to roll on. There were moments where they were settling for a lot of outside shots, a lot of jump shots, moment where they went away from Juju Watkins, moments where they went away from driving to the basket. I mean, when you think about it, if you've got two players on the opposite teams that are in foul trouble, you might want to consider, attacking the basket, attacking the paint, making them have to play you, have to force their hand from a disciplinary standpoint to see if you can draw that additional contact. But they didn't do that, and I think that it was mostly inexperience, but it wasn't for the lack of trying. Juju Watkins, 29 points from her. She had assistance from Mackenzie Ford, 24 points from her. I mean, Juju Watkins has really been the star of this team, and I've said that she has played with some tremendous teammates that have allowed her to shine, that have allowed her to be the star player. She has a supporting cast that has really stood by her and helped propel this USC team. And if I'm her, I know in this moment it doesn't feel like there's anything to be proud of. In this moment, you're not really settling for, we're happy to be here. In this moment, I know it hurts. But when she takes the time to step back and think about all that USC accomplished, I hope she realizes how proud she should really be, how proud that team should really be, and be very excited about what the future looks like for the Trojans.
Absolutely. Future looks pretty bright, and there was a full screen that we saw while you were talking, 920 points this year. That's the most points by a freshman in D1 women's basketball history. What a story for Juju Watkins and for the Trojans, but it is UConn that keeps rolling. But hey, she's along the names of the Clarks, the Reeses, the Beckers.
She's in the National Player of the Year conversation, and for a good reason.
And for a very, very good reason. A big congrats to USC and a big congrats to UConn for rolling. Tarica, we're not getting rid of you yet because we got some Final Four action to talk about in a bit. Beckers and Clark is what lies ahead. And here's a look at the most Final Four appearances by school, and UConn running away with it. This is now 23 Final Four appearances in school history. They've reached the Final Four in 15 of the last 16 tournaments, looking to keep things rolling alongside the men's here in the Final Four. Well, the stage is set. The Final Four have been determined. South Carolina, NC State, Iowa, UConn. We preview this year's road to the national championship. That's coming your way next. You're watching CBS Sports HQ.